3, 2, 1 live. Hello everyone, and welcome to another Friday night live, or Friday morning, possibly even Saturday morning, depending on where you guys are. Sorry, I'm a little bit late. We were having some technical issues trying to get Ella into the chat. She is ready and waiting. So we will try our hardest to answer a few questions from you guys, but it can get a little bit busy. So just bear with us. Right, so this is a very exciting live because it's the first time I've ever done a proper kind of collab interview live rather than just having a whole bunch of people on like I did last time. So it's really nice. It's really nice to see so many people on here. Hello, everyone. So my very special guest tonight is Purple Ella. I'm sure some of you may know her. She is also an autistic YouTuber like myself. She's also an autistic mother like myself. I think she basically just harassed me on Twitter and was like, we should do videos together. And then we started doing some collabs. So this is the first kind of collab, and we've recorded another video which will be on Ella's channel, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So let's us all give a really big welcome to Purple Ella, or just Ella, depending on what you might call her. Hello, Ella.
Hi.
Now let's just check everybody can hear both of us before we start this. I hope so.
Is anybody out there?
So Ella, I kind of introduced you, but I probably didn't do a very good job. So could you just introduce yourself to my viewers?
Yeah, hi, I'm Ella, and I run the YouTube channel Purple Ella, as well as doing quite a lot of autism advocacy work and public speaking and training teachers and everything autism related. And yes, I did not harass on Twitter. I gently nudged.
It was very polite. It was very, very polite. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us live. I know it's like a bit overwhelming doing all these lives, but you've started doing them as well, haven't you?
Yeah, recently. I think I did my first live about 2 months before the lockdown began, and then decided in my wisdom that I'd do a weekly live. So I do a weekly live on a Wednesday at 4 o'clock over on my channel every week, basically through the lockdown.
Very cool. So somebody said Ella is very quiet. Maybe you might need to either adjust the mic or shout. I don't know.
Some fiddling. See if that helps. Just excuse my lack of me.
Is that any better? Can you hear me better?
Yeah, that sounds a bit better to me, actually.
Is that better?
Cool. So we are going to be talking about the autism assessment process, what it was like for both of us, because we both went through it as adults. We both went through it when we were mothers. Yeah. And just kind of like going through the experience, because I know there's a lot of people watching. A lot of my viewers are pre-diagnosis or, you know, in the process themselves. And it's a bit scary, isn't it? I think. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that the diagnostic process is especially scary because by the time you reach the point that you're looking to be assessed and considering diagnosis, you've already kind of come to the conclusion that you're probably on the autistic spectrum. And the idea that you can go into a room with a professional who can tell you that you're wrong and take you right back to square one is actually really terrifying, I think. Yeah,
exactly. And I think, I know from my perspective, I remember feeling like, okay, well, this explained everything so well, but what if it's not that? What then? You know, and it's not just you're back to square one. It's like, well, who are you? Are you just a sort of rubbish at life or something? I don't know. It's a very, I think compared to other diagnoses, it's very much entwined with your identity in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, prior to my own autism diagnosis, I'd actually been given several mental health diagnoses, which had never really quite explained the difficulties that I was experiencing, but were something to cling on to in times of trouble. So I think that by the time I'd reached the point of realizing that I am autistic, and like you say, it did explain everything so neatly. If I'd been told that I wasn't autistic at that point, it would have felt like there was nowhere else to go, really, with the challenges.
Yeah.
And like then just feeling like I'm just bad at life, which is, nobody really wants to sit with that, do they?
Well, I don't know. I've made it this far. Right. So I was going to start by asking you. It's weird because we just had it. We had a conversation. When was it? Like a week ago or a few days ago, to talk about this and about all the other things. So like I know the answers to these questions, but I'm going to ask them again. So tell us about how you were diagnosed and when you were diagnosed, and kind of like what your situation was in life. How did you even start getting to that point? That's many questions. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I'll just condense that into what happened before and during the diagnosis. So basically, I was in my mid-30s, having spent probably 20 years prior to that experiencing, anxieties and all the challenges that many autistic people face. And as I say, I'd been given several mental health diagnoses and nothing had quite fit. And I'd reached the point of kind of feeling like I was banging my head against a brick wall trying to figure out what was going on with my brain. And then my eldest child by this point was about 7 or 8, and the school had identified that she might be on the autistic spectrum, and we'd been through the diagnostic process with her and she had been diagnosed with autism. And then one day I took her out to a local cafe to spend some time one-on-one with her because, as many of you will know, I have actually got 3 children. And when I got to the parking spot that I planned to park in to go to this cafe, they had turned the entire area into residents only parking, and I couldn't park. And because I couldn't park, I couldn't think about what to do next because I'm not very good at making a new plan. And so I basically had one of what had been many, many car related meltdowns, but in the context of having kind of recently received this diagnosis for my eldest child, something kind of clicked, and it literally was like a light bulb moment of, oh my God, I'm autistic. Maybe I'm autistic.
Yeah.
So I spoke to lots of people. I spoke to my husband. I spoke to lots of my friends, and lots of them did not think this was the craziest suggestion. In fact, a couple of them actually said, "What, you mean you didn't know?" Which was quite surprising. So it was at that point that I decided to go and visit my GP and ask to be assessed for autism. And I was fortunate enough to be assessed within sort of 3 or 4 months of that realization and diagnosed by the clinician that I saw.
Oh wow, that's quite compared to some of the waiting lists, that's quite quick, isn't it? And how many years ago was this?
This was, well, I was 36. I'm now 41. So five years. I think I'm about in June. I've got my 6-year autism anniversary.
Ooh.
That's not a word, but I declare it is now.
Autiversary, yeah.
Yeah. So it was kind of right. It was kind of right at the start of the lists becoming really long. But I think in my case, I had been sent a letter saying you're now on a waiting list, and at some point we'll contact you. And I kind of rang them up and went, no, I won't be able to handle that. The post will be coming every day. Every day I'll be thinking, is it coming? Is it coming? And they'd sent a list of mental health resources in the meantime to access. And I basically said, I have already accessed all of these services. And these are the difficulties that I've had. And I think because I've had a couple of hospitalizations and significant mental health difficulties, they kind of managed to find a clinician who would see me quite quickly. And so I feel like maybe slightly jumped the queue, which probably isn't fair, but at the time I didn't realize, and it was a really useful thing for me to get that diagnosis at that point. So I'm very grateful I didn't have to wait several years or even longer, like many of your viewers and my viewers are telling me is happening.
Yeah. And so you went to the GP, and then you got you were referred within, what did you say, 4 months or something like that?
Yeah.
And so what did? Sorry.
I saw the GP in about March, and I was diagnosed in June. So that is really quite quick. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very quick. And how many sessions did you have with the psychologist that you saw? Because I had 3 sessions in total. And they were 2 hours each. So it was 6 hours worth of interviews plus questionnaires and things. And I was just wondering if it was similar.
No, we received questionnaires ahead of the appointments. There was one for me to fill out and one for that my husband filled out. And then the actual appointment was it was somewhere between 2 and 3 hours. So there was a big, long interview and kind of diagnostic appointment. And then the clinician went off to discuss my case with a group of other people, other clinicians, I guess, and then came back and actually gave me the diagnosis. So it was all kind of done in a morning. And one of the things he said to me within about the first hour, I think, of meeting me, he did say, this isn't going to be a difficult one. So I don't really know how interpret
You
that.
said that too, you know.
Did they? Strange, yeah.
The thing is, though, I don't think I was being particularly autistic that day, but she was like, I think it was the end of maybe the first or second session where I'd like just told her my entire life story, and she's like, yeah.
All the details.
I think we know what's going to happen, but yeah. Oh, so that's funny. So how? Sorry, say that again. How many hours in total did you spend with them?
I think it was about 2.5 hours in total.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was quite, I mean, for me, talking that much about my life, it was quite intense. Did you find?
It was really intense in terms of the actual appointment itself, and then the kind of aftermath of the appointment was a lot more intense than I expected it to be. Yeah, talking about your no appointment where you have to talk about the things that you struggle with is ever going to be an easy situation, but talking about the things that you struggle with and the ways in which you differ to other people for 2.5 hours to a complete stranger is really challenging. And actually, one of the things that he did that was probably the hardest part of the appointment for me was I was sitting in the waiting room and the guy came out to bring me to the room, and he walked over to me and he held out his hand, and I just kind of went, I'm not never really know what to do with the handshake thing. So that was probably the starting clue. I think I kind of flapped my hand in front of him and then followed him into the room.
And he's just like, autism 1.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it begins. There was a really good question that I wanted to bring up on the on the thingy. Look at this. Look at this, Ella. So I am says, did the GP carry out any tests to establish your suitability? So for me, my GP, basically, I had a big document of me, and then I condensed it into a few bullet points for going to my GP. I think from what I said, I communicated it well enough that I think she was like, okay, we're going to take it from here. And she saw what I was getting at. I don't really remember much about that, except that she has incredibly piercing blue eyes and she would not stop staring at me. And so I was I was just staring back at her because I didn't know what to do. But no, she didn't require me to do any tests. It was really just my own personal testimony. I think other GPs are different. What was your GP like, Ella?
I think similarly to you, I went in with kind of a bullet point list of why I had come to this conclusion. And I think there's something in there about the fact that both of us are kind of self-declared extrovert autistic people, which makes it easier for us to go into a clinical setting and say, these are the reasons that I think I might be autistic. Here, have my list, and let me tell you a million things about autism. And the doctor just kind of go, oh, yeah, right, okay, here you go.
That's exactly what happened with me.
Yeah, but for autistic people who aren't extrovert or who have problems communicating generally, that would be a really challenging stage. And I kind of suspect that that's why it might have been easier for me to get that assessment, that referral in the first place.
Yeah. But on the other hand, a more introverted presentation might be like more stereotypical in some ways. And so they might see the person struggling to communicate and be more, I don't know. It could be either. That's funny that we had kind of, I think we're quite similar in a lot of ways. We've been discussing these various ways. Let me see if there's any other questions, or if we should move on. So we've got a question here saying, from Potato actually, I've been told that I would need to bring someone who knows me well with me. I'm a bit worried because I haven't got anyone. Was anyone else in the same situation? So this is, I think, one of the problematic areas of diagnosis, because they want, what is the word, corroboration from people who know you or knew you as a child. That's not always possible. So who did you have anyone with you, or did you have people sending in questionnaires, or what did you have?
Well, I didn't actually go to my mum, who might have been the obvious choice in this instance, because I think actually oftentimes parents kind of normalize a lot of the stuff that goes on with their children and wouldn't necessarily find it particularly easy to start to see their child in that light, and might be more likely to try and be overly positive, to try and parents want to make their children sound good.
Yeah.
So I didn't really, even though my mum is actually an expert, she has a master's in autism spectrum condition and taught autistic children for a living. Irony. I didn't really feel confident that she was going to be able to deal with that situation for her own child, particularly since she knows that I've struggled and she might have felt, I don't know, kind of responsible. So I took Mr. Purple, my husband, who has known me since I was 18, and by this point I was 36, as I say, so he's known me for a long time and probably definitely knows me better than anybody else. And he was really valuable to have there with me to support and also to remember things that I might have remembered in that interview, and to help me cope with that, like you say, really intense experience. I think if someone doesn't have anyone that can go with them, in terms of actually feel you're able to articulate your
I've lost you a bit.
And you just need someone for disability. Why am I getting on my screen right now, Dave? Sorry, my husband has just done something on the Apple TV, which, yes, you did. Anyway, sorry. Small domestic here in the Purple household. Moving on. I took my husband with me, but if you haven't got anyone to go with you, I think there are touring programs and people that, you know, might be able to supply someone to come just for moral support, perhaps.
Yeah. Because I didn't have to bring anyone with me. I should point out, for those who don't know, actually, I live in the Netherlands, so this whole process was done here. It was done in English, actually, though. They found me somebody who could do it in English, because I was like, it's a weird thing to do in a different language. Like, I can order things in the shops and stuff, but like, I'm not getting diagnosed with autism in Dutch. You're right there. You look like you're struggling with something.
I'm having a little trouble with the sound. Sam, you're breaking up a little bit. And also am I a bit behind? But I couldn't hear very well. Sorry.
Well, maybe it'll buffer out. As Gary says, Mr. Purple, a legend.
He is
right.
a legend.
So
Yes.
So during the actual assessment, when they ask you about your life, what was it like did you feel like they were judging you, or did you feel ashamed? What was it actually like for you as an experience?
The clinician that I saw is actually the guy who developed the Nice Guide for Diagnosing Adults in the UK alongside Sacha Baron Cohen. He was part of the committee that came up with those diagnostic guidelines, and he was actually really kind and gentle and generous and supportive, and seemed genuinely quite fascinated by the idea of people like me who had lived a life without any knowledge of their autism. So I found the experience of talking to him quite nice, because it was validating and because he was kind. He had quite integrated facial expressions, which I find more helpful if I'm having a conversation with someone face to face. I think I was really lucky that the person that I saw, but even so, I think it was actually, for me, it was reading the diagnostic letter afterwards where I got those feelings of, oh, is this really me? And feeling a little bit more judged, because he talked about me making a lot of expressions and a lot of gestures, but them not quite fitting or being appropriate for what I was saying. So then I spent a couple of weeks kind of thinking, am I going around giving off completely the wrong signals and asking my friends, do I look weird when I talk? So I think it was reading that letter, reading it in black and white, all the reasons he had diagnosed me that was problematic.
Yeah. I had a very similar experience, actually. It's funny. It's going to be like, me too. Because I think the woman was very nice. Actually, she was like, do you have any questions for me before we start? And the only question I could think of was, are you autistic? And she was like, no. But she was a very nice woman, and you know, like I felt comfortable chatting and stuff and talking about my life and everything like that. And then I read the report, and it's a bit like, well, it's clinical, isn't it? Because they treat you like a human, hopefully, in the assessment, and then they you read a report, and you know, even at that point, I'd already managed to kind of put a positive spin on my so-called deficits, you know. And feeling that first bit of sort of almost autism pride, and then reading the report where she's like, she dresses and appears very young for her age and stuff like that, and I'm like, oh my god, am I a big loser that's just like going around dressing like an 18-year-old or something? I wasn't even wearing, like, I wasn't, anyway. That was one of the comments in my report, that I look pretty young for my age. And of course, you read those things and you take them on board. Like, is this how I come across? Of course, they're just humans, aren't they? They're just people. So they might have an opinion of, you know, you might be making gestures in the wrong way, but somebody else might not think that. So it's, yeah, it's kind of like a bit of a mind, you know, fork. Don't want to swear too much, sure, it's,
sure.
you know.
In fact, these days I own dressing young for my these days, but yeah, I think it might be that because I'm using an external mic, it's causing a lot of feedback when I'm trying to listen to you. So if I look confused, it's because I'm kind of basically listening to you in stuttery. It's not good. Sound isn't good for me. So if I look confused, I'm trying my best to understand what.
All right. And if it all goes wrong, I'll take you off the screen and you can sort yourself out. So just we need to have like hand signals or something.
I'm taking the mic out, but then it'd be really quiet. Do you mind if I try that?
Well, let me just, I'll take you off the stream and I'll talk a little bit more about something, and then you can just tell me when you're ready to come back, okay? Right. More technical issues. It's so much fun doing this. So we were talking about the actual assessment process and how we felt. I had basically 6 hours of talking to someone in total, and it was pretty exhausting. I then also had questionnaires which were done online, some of which were in Dutch and some of which were in English. And I don't actually know what the questionnaires were called, but I did basically, is it called a battery of tests? I'm not sure, but you know, where they screen you for everything. So they want to try and rule out depression, anxiety, OCD. They also try and rule out psychosis and personality disorders and all of that. And my questionnaires came back very well. My questionnaires came back, some of which said that I was autistic and some of which didn't. And I was very glad that the diagnostician had a very good approach, because I think also when you have questionnaires that are yes or no, of course, autistic people can never answer questions that are just yes or no, or like, this sounds a lot like me, or this doesn't sound like me, because we just think, well, in what situation, you know, and we look at the details. And I was saying to my diagnostician, you know, the questionnaires were very hard to answer because this, and this. And so I guess I was just lucky that I had someone who was willing to look at the bigger picture and wasn't like, well, this test you didn't score very high on, so I'm just going to cancel the whole autism thing. So yeah, from my perspective, it seemed like she was taking into account what I was saying, the questionnaire results, and also the testimony from it was from my mum who did it. And basically putting that all together in a context and kind of saying yes or no. I don't know if Ella's ready to come back yet. Yeah, she's coming back. All right. So we've got a question here saying, oh no, not that one, sorry. Was the AQ test used at any time, or have you tried it yourself? I know it's not a diagnostic tool. It wasn't used for me personally. I did try it. I actually tried it in a video. Have you done the AQ test at all? She's either very still or frozen.
Hello? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. Can you hear me? Okay. Were you asking about ADHD?
The AQ test.
Yeah. So yeah, I did try the AQ test before I went for my diagnostic appointment. I scored definitely in the autistic scoring band IQ test, but definitely in the low end of that, because I was quite confused. Like, there's a question on there: would you rather go to a party or a library? And my answer is neither. So, so I found some of it. I found some of it quite oddly specific, I think, the AQ test, to maybe that kind of stereotypical, like there's a question on there about you particularly fascinated by strings of numbers or sequences of numbers.
Yeah.
Which to me is really the sort of stereotypical maths loving autistic person.
Kind of like Rain Man.
And I'm not fascinated. Yeah, exactly. So I scored, as I say, I scored in the kind of low end of yes, autistic. How about you? Did you do it?
I only did it after I was diagnosed, and then I did a video last October on my channel where I answered it, and I scored at the low end of the autistic. But that's the thing. It isn't like you're very autistic or you're not autistic. It's like, this is just how we phrase the questions. So if you are a stereotypical autistic person, then it will come out as higher as if you're not. So that's kind of like, I don't know how to take this thing off. Except
I also think that these tests, the AQ test and other similar tests, are dependent on kind of, you're answering on behalf of yourself, and I think it's impossible to be objective in that kind of situation.
Yeah, and also they say, do other people think that you're this or that? And it's like, okay, you're asking somebody who's autistic what other people think of them. Like, I find those kind of questions very strange for anyone to answer, really, because nobody has that kind of level of insight, really.
Yeah, or do you struggle with this specific thing where I might think I'm not struggling, but outside observers might think that I am?
Yeah, exactly. Or the other way around.
Yeah. Like, I think my gestures and expressions are entirely appropriate for what I'm saying, but the diagnostician thought not that I'm attached to that particular observation.
Oh my gosh, no. When people make off the cuff comments like that, those are usually the ones that I get really, really drawn into. So no, I totally get what you mean. So let me just have a look at. So you got your diagnosis. They gave you, your autism card to carry around. That's metaphorical autism card, or literal. Do you have an autism card?
Do I have an autism certificate? Yes.
This is the problem with the lag. I'm making jokes now.
Would it help if we did dance? That's actually my solution to problems on.
So no, you don't have a certificate.
Might be, is that? No. Just sit still.
Oh right.
Wow.
We have got I've got a super chat from Catherine Seeger, who asks, any advice for an initial telephone assessment? My advice would be to, if you are as bad at auditory processing as me, my advice would be to write things down. Write things down as if you are, going to see a GP, and then you have bullet points to talk through. What would you say, Ella?
I would actually refuse a telephone assessment at the stage that I'm at now, in terms of the confidence that I'm at in asking for adjustments because of my autism. And I find telephone conversations incredibly challenging and not productive. I think because of that whole thing of you have to know when to stop talking, which I really struggle with. So I tend to just talk continuously when I'm on the phone and then go, yeah, okay, I'm done now, bye. So I wouldn't have the telephone assessment. First place, I would request for it to be like a video process, like a video, a Skype chat or something like that instead?
Well, I guess it depends
that's
on.
not really answering the question.
Well, I guess it depends on what they're comfortable with, you know, because it's like I'm really uncomfortable on the phone, but I'm way more uncomfortable being like, I refuse. Do you know what I mean? So like for me, it would be worse to have to go through the stress of refusing than to just do the damn phone call, you know?
Yeah, I see what you mean. I think I've gotten, as the years have gone on, I've gotten more confident in asking for what I need. But yeah, if you're in a position where you can do that, I would definitely agree with you in terms of writing things down and having them on a piece of paper in front of you before you start that conversation, so that you make sure that you share all of the information you're wanting to share.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's the best.
Because I find it just, you know, someone will ask me something, and first of all, it takes me a while to actually process their question. And this person that says telephone assessment for autism has it absolutely right. Like, who thought of that? But you know, like I'm doing it right now. I'll get lost in my train of thoughts, and then I'll just be like, I completely don't know why I'm autistic. If somebody were to call me up on the phone and be like, okay, so what do you struggle with? And I have got a whole YouTube channel where I've talked about this for, you know, over and over and over. I still wouldn't be able to answer that on the phone. So I would say writing things down is key. Also, I would say getting it out there at the beginning that you're really uncomfortable on the phone if you are. Because I find that like just breaking the ice a bit and just saying, I really hate talking on the phone. So if I pause or I don't know when to speak, that's why.
Yeah, that's all really good advice. I can't really add anything to that because that's pretty much exactly what I would second. I suppose one finding might be what I do with a lot of the phone calls that I have to deal with now is actually have Mr. Purple represent me on the phone. So I will give him the information that I want to be passed on. They will speak to me at the beginning to confirm that in terms of privacy issues and safeguarding that I'm comfortable for that to take place with Mr. Purple. And this includes doctors and specialists. And he will take that phone call for me with the information that I've given him. So if that could be a consideration.
Yeah, that would be a possibility. And I think also in addition to preparing your, you know, your autistic traits and your reasons, I think be prepared, now I can't even English. Be prepared for, I forgot what question I was going to say. Be prepared for the question is, why do you want a diagnosis? Because that's the one that threw me, because I'd be like, well, because, but knowing why it would help you is something that I think is quite important, because it makes your case a bit. Because if you say it will be good for my mental health, then that is a consideration that they really have to say, well, okay, well, this person might not be needing so many mental health resources or something if they got a diagnosis, or, you know, all of these reasons I think might be things to consider if I could go back and do it again. So I hope that answered the question, actually. Whose question was it? Catherine's.
Yeah, I think.
Somebody was talking about video assessment. Hold on. Somebody said Tia says video assessments are not great either, though. The psychiatrist I talked to said after 5 minutes I couldn't be autistic because I was making eye contact with him over video. I don't know if she's.
I didn't quite catch that. Was that the eye contact?
Yeah, the psychiatrist talking about making eye contact over video being a reason why you can't be autistic. I mean, I'm making eye contact with Ella now. It doesn't look like I am. If she looks at me, it doesn't look like she is. I can make eye contact with everyone by looking here. It's not the same as looking at a person. I'm sorry?
Yeah, my gran taught me when I was really little. There's a lot of autism in my family. So, yeah, my sister has autistic children. I've got two. It's very likely that my granddad was autistic. And my gran taught me when I was really little, when I was 4 or 5, she said, Ella, you don't really look at people properly in the face. Here's what you need to do. You need to look them directly in the eyebrows, and that will give the impression that you are giving them eye contact. So I was taught that skill at a really, really young age. And as you've said, it looks like I'm giving eye contact when I'm not. So I think the idea that as autistic people, we wouldn't be able to figure out what is expected and find a workaround is kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you can explain how you feel about eye contact, even if you might be able to do it, that might be helpful.
Yeah, exactly. But I don't like the eye contact thing as well, because usually when I make eye contact with people, it's people that I am really uncomfortable with anyway. I don't know if you like, I sometimes can and I sometimes don't. It really depends on the situation for me. But sometimes if somebody gives me a weird vibe, they're making really intrusive, that's not the right, intrusive eye contact with me. I can't stop looking at them because I'm afraid not to. I didn't realize that not everyone has this.
Yeah,
sorry, the lag is
people make eye contact. You do end up, like exactly as you've said, like you say, another Me Too moment of like staring back and then thinking, am I looking too much, or am I, and then sort of darting to the side, and then I don't know. Eye contact doesn't feel uncomfortable so much as that I'm never sure whether I'm doing it right. So when I'm talking to someone face to face, there is a part of me thinking about whether I'm doing the right thing with my eyes or not the whole of the time that I'm having that conversation.
Yeah.
Is that how it feels for you? Or?
It's more like resource intensive, if that makes sense. So it's different if I'm talking to someone that I'm very comfortable with. But if I'm talking to someone I don't know very well, like a doctor I've just met, focusing on eye contact, but then also maybe focusing on what my face is doing. Or if I'm like in a social situation where I'm bored, and so I'm like pretending not to be bored, I'm like, okay, am I making the right facial expression? Or if it's a different, so I'm concentrating so much on eye contact and facial expressions and maybe body language or something like this. Because sometimes I find myself in strange positions that I don't know how I got there, like held up, and people will say, well, you're sitting funny or something. So it's like social situations themselves aren't the thing. The thing that is exhausting is constantly monitoring to see, am I doing it right? But I don't know, that's just what you kind of said.
Yeah, it feels like in a social situation, it feels like the whole time, exactly as you've expressed, thinking about not talking too much is usually my first consideration, because I do talk a lot. Asking appropriate questions, sitting right. Am I doing the right thing with my hands? Am I doing the right thing with my face? And I end up kind of fiddling a lot and fidgeting a lot and not how to get comfortable. And then am I looking at the right person? And then I don't know about you, but it's also quite labor intensive, because then when I leave that social situation, I'm going to do a lot of analyzing. Did I get it right? And probably, particularly in the past when I was less confident, thinking that I didn't get it right and thinking about the ways in which I didn't get it right, and that everybody's probably formed this opinion of me, and kind of, a bit of a self-esteem spiral. I used to send out apology texts after I spent time with people. They would get a text from me saying, ever so sorry, I'll try harder next time. Or something.
Oh my gosh, I did
sorry,
that.
I was too much, sorry.
See, the thing that I used to do when I was younger. Yeah, I didn't do it so much. I definitely did it when I was younger, but this is when I was at university and I was like masking to the max. I would just I went to university and I decided I'm not going to be this person anymore. I'm going to be whoever they want me to be, right? And that's when I don't think I was addicted to alcohol in a physiological sense. I was using it because it made it much easier, first of all, to mask, but second of all, to be like, oh, well, I was just acting funny because I was drunk, and that was the best excuse I could come up with. Like, oh, I'm so sorry, I was drunk. I didn't know what I was saying, or didn't know what I was doing. And that's awful when you think about it, when you look back and you realize what you were doing. Oh, right. Let's see if there's any more comments. Sorry, the lag is making it so hard for us to have any kind of a natural flow of conversation. We keep cutting each other off, and I really am trying not to.
I think there's a slight lag, which is making this slightly challenging.
Yeah, exactly.
As well. But we just go with it.
Right, next question. If we do bits of talking blocks, that might be easier. So imposter syndrome, did you still have that after your diagnosis?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Imposter syndrome, did you have that after your diagnosis, and how long did that kind of take to go away?
Oh gosh, ages. So immediately after the diagnosis, I remember sitting with Mr. Purple and sort of saying, so okay, I've got this diagnosis, but do either of us actually believe this? And he sort of said at the time, you know, I think we're going to have to sit with it for a while, because it's hard to go from not being defined as an autistic person to being an autistic person. And I would say it took me around a year to kind of confidently feel in myself that that diagnosis was right, and that talking on the internet about autism wasn't, you know, something that I shouldn't be doing. And probably as each year has gone on since then, and as I say, I'm just about to hit my fifth, did I say fifth? Yeah, as each year has gone on, I'd say that in the last year or two, I have never thought, oh, maybe I'm not autistic. So maybe 3 years, that's my, yeah, about 3 years.
Yeah. I think I still get it. I still get it sometimes, but for me, it was a little bit different because, well, first of all, no one else in my family has been diagnosed. It's not like I had a child that was diagnosed or something. It was just like me coming to this realization. And then I waited. From that moment, it was like a year and a half until the diagnosis. So I kind of already gone through a year and a half. I got my diagnosis. And that was when I was just like, right, I've got a diagnosis. Now I'm allowed to make videos on YouTube, you know, but I still get comments being like, you look normal. I'm like, okay, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
And I know it's easy to say, just ignore the haters, ignore the comments, but it's hard because I know what people think about autism, and I know that I'm not necessarily what they would think of, which is part of the reason why I want to change their minds. But it kind of comes and goes, and it's getting less and less. But the problem is, I now spend so much time talking to autistic people online. I have autistic friends, and so it's getting to the point where I'm like, well, everyone kind of is autistic because I don't actually go outside of that circle. Do you have the same kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the vast majority of my friends have connection, either they're autistic or their children are autistic. And so, yeah, it can feel like I live in an autistic bubble for sure. So sometimes I do have conversations with my neurotypical friends about the differences in their experiences of the world to kind of help process that. But I think, as you've said, now that you mention that, the fact that there are so many autistic people in my family, diagnosed or otherwise, is a really helpful kind of confirmation for me that what are the chances that it's something else when my own children are autistic. But in terms of that autism bubble and seeing autism everywhere, I think it's that it kind of makes it easy to connect with those people that say, oh, everyone's a little bit autistic, which, as infuriating as it is the reason that we see so many autistic traits in the world, because they are just that, aren't they? They're human traits, that everybody has some of those human traits which put together constitute an autism diagnosis.
Yeah, and it's kind of like a pattern recognition thing as well. So many autistic people are very good at spotting patterns and inconsistencies and all of that. And so someone else might say, well, everybody gets shy or stumbles over their words sometimes or whatever. And I'm like, yes, but it's like a triad, and I can see that the pattern of autism, and it's like, you know, it's the special interest, it's the sensory, it's the social, and it kind of all goes together. And when some people can't see that pattern, it's frustrating for you to be like, but I see the autism. And they're like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
I just wanted to say thank you to, sorry, I just wanted to say thank you to, there was a super chat. Neil Thompson, thank you so much for the super chat. And there was another one, Roseberry, thank you, that's really sweet. Oh, let's put that on the screen. Thank you, Roseberry. And thank you very much, Neil. Sorry, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, that's a really interesting point that you raise in terms of that people not necessarily believing you're autistic in terms of that diagnostic process. Like kind of bearing in mind that if and when you receive that official stamp of approval, official diagnosis, that doesn't mean you're going to suddenly have everybody and yourself completely buy into that necessarily. You're still going to have to deal with those doubts from yourself and from the outside world. But also add, I liberally use the button on those people, so I don't see their comments anymore, which is really helpful.
Yeah, that too. Josh says, imposter syndrome sucks. I think it's our empathy kicking in again. Like, these other people have it so much worse than me. I don't deserve this diagnosis. And I think that's kind of true. It was very hard for me to stop being like, well, I'm coping. There's got to be other autistic people who are not coping, right? And feel like, I've talked a little bit about functioning labels and stuff like that. But it's very hard for me not to be like, I'm coping, I'm functioning, and admit my weaknesses in a way, because then it's like our society has conditioned us to be strong and try and get through everything and don't accept help if you don't need it. So that was kind of difficult for me to see myself as vulnerable and imperfect somehow, perfectly imperfect.
I suppose, I see what you. I suppose that it's like any kind of condition or disability, if you like, where there's going to be people who struggle more than other people with that same diagnosis, and it's okay to acknowledge when we talk about functioning labels. I think functioning labels are useful, but I think it's okay to acknowledge that some autistic people need more support than I do. But that doesn't mean that I'm not autistic. It's that they need more support, just as I also have a physical health condition. I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and some people with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome are in a wheelchair all the time and need more support than me, but I still have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I suppose that's one way that I find it helpful to look at it. And I think because for me personally, I haven't kept it together. I haven't had a career. I hadn't stopped having weekly meltdowns. I had psychiatric hospital admissions. I had significantly struggled prior to receiving my diagnosis, not in the same way as an autistic person who can't live independently, but in my own way, I'd really struggled. So I think that makes it easier for me to accept that. Where I have got a friend who's just been through that, and she hasn't struggled in the same ways as me. She's had a career and she hasn't had such public struggles, I guess. But her struggles that she has had are important to her, and therefore they're valid. It's not like a competition. Everybody's struggles are their struggles and they're valid, and it's all perspective, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think the thing that irritates me the most about functioning labels, I did a video on this, saying like it's also kind of like assuming that a low functioning autistic doesn't have things to offer and value and that sort of thing. But calling people it's either high functioning or mild autism, I just find that incredibly dismissive, because it implies like, well, you're high functioning, you're fine. And it's like they have no idea how much it takes to get to this point. I mean, you can see like this, I can't keep my life together. I've just been like, my executive functioning is absolutely appalling at the moment. It's like, I don't know, I think it's probably lockdown that's just driving it to that. But, I end up missing appointments. I end up doing all of these things because I cannot keep my life in order. And I call it an ADHD tax. I think autistic tax would be relevant as well, of like, this society punishes you for not getting your things in order. They'll give you late payment fines or all of this kind of stuff. And it's like, even that, it's not that I don't want to, it's just I can't. And trying to explain that to someone is very frustrating. Anyway, I've just got another super chat. Thank you, Kendra. Stay safe and keep up the great work. I hope you are safe as well. So yeah, did you get a level with your diagnosis then, Ella? Did they actually give you one, a support level?
No, I didn't get a level. It said autistic spectrum condition, and then in brackets, previously Asperger's type.
Sorry, I'm just... So you were diagnosed with Asperger's? Sorry, I'm just trying to find, I'm trying to find these ones. I can't put it on the screen. I don't know why I can't find it.
I always say as well, I'll just talk and cover while you figure that out.
Yeah.
I always say that also, when you think about autism, often when people are talking about low functioning autism, which I really hate as a term, what they're talking about is people who have autism, other comorbidities like learning difficulties and epilepsy and speech and language difficulties. And so I always try to explain that though our autistic challenges might actually look quite similar, the way that we react and present to those and how public we are about those struggles is going to differ if you don't have the comorbidities, but it doesn't mean you aren't experiencing similar struggles. It's just that I'm going to quietly go to my house and melt down where nobody can see me. Where if I maybe had learning difficulties, I'm that meltdown more publicly in the street, and then people are going to recognize that autism much more.
Yeah.
For example, not that I'm saying that everybody would do that with learning difficulties, but my kind of take on that can look so different, and the struggle that people have kind of connecting those two different presentations, I guess, of autism.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Before, like the last couple of years, the amount of meltdowns I had were very, very small because I would tend to shut down rather than meltdown. But you know, me telling people, well, I don't think I could reflect on any of them again with somebody who was there, because they were in very strange situations. But like, you know, I know that when I get pushed to a certain amount, I will melt down. And now that I recognize why that is, it helps me a lot. Anyway, I better get to this super chat, because this is from Josephine Smith. What should I do when I relate so entirely and know in myself I'm autistic, but my assessors wouldn't give me a diagnosis, conceding only that I have significant traits I can't help but mask? So I think this is a really interesting issue with the whole diagnosis process, because in the criteria, it is written that your autistic traits or symptoms or whatever should be a clinically significant, they should impair your everyday functioning in a clinically significant way. And it's quite, that's quite a subjective measure, isn't it? What do you think, Ella?
Yeah. I think if this person is in the UK, I would say that this is a very common scenario, and I have several friends who have been told exactly the same thing. You are entitled to a second opinion on the NHS, and the Law Wing Centre in London are the specialists in diagnosing autistic women and girls. And I know several people who they had to fight for it, who have been able to obtain an assessment at the Lorna Wing Centre as their second opinion, and have then been given that diagnosis, being told exactly at their first appointment. So that would be my start point in that situation, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think there's also, I mean, somebody asked me this actually the other day on Instagram. You can obviously go private in the UK. You can go private anywhere, I think. And there are some people who will do a diagnosis online, but it really depends on what you need from the diagnosis. If you need it done in an official way, or if you just need somebody to tell you what you already know. Because the thing is, if they say you have significant traits, well, you know that they see it, don't you? You know that they see it in you. It's maybe just because you have had a life that's been set up for you in a way that supports you, and you haven't encountered any significant mental health issues, or, you know, significant barriers like not being able to find a job. And so it's kind of unfair that, you know, we only diagnose by how much your life is falling apart at the time, rather than we should be diagnosing by this is your neurotype, for example.
Yeah, agree entirely. And I really, this person who's left this question has my full sort of sympathy and compassion, really, because it's not fair, it's not helpful, and it's kind of left her in, he or she, in a limbo situation of, oh well, you are quite autistic but not enough to be given the official diagnosis.
Just a little bit.
That information.
Exactly. What are you supposed to do with that
just
information? Yeah.
So I would say, I mean, I personally think that self-diagnosis for those that don't have access to good quality, appropriate to women or appropriate to their adult masking, I support self-diagnosing those people, but I also can fully understand needing to have that stamp of approval, particularly if you're looking for accommodations in the workplace. So I guess it depends on how much fight you've got in you to try and keep moving forward. But I think sometimes people feel, oh, I shouldn't give an opinion because that just makes me a neurotic person who's looking for a label. I think I would reassure those people that the diagnostic assessments that are being run in the UK are not appropriate to adults who mask. They're not appropriate to the majority of autistic people. They're appropriate to one very narrow stereotype of what an autistic person is. So just because a clinician who's looking at that narrow stereotype with criteria that are not appropriate has said you're not autistic, that doesn't mean that you are being neurotic, seeking someone who actually has knowledge and an appropriate assessment for you somewhere else.
Yeah.
Sorry,
God, well
that was
said.
a bit soapbox, wasn't it?
No, well
I feel
said. That's good. I like it.
Makes me cross. I have a friend who is very much autistic. She really is very, very autistic. I love her, but everybody that knows her recognizes this. And she went to our local diagnostic team, and they told her she couldn't possibly be autistic because she's maintained a friendship for longer than 10 years and she's got a job. Those were the reasons they gave that she couldn't be autistic. Dog. And that makes me really cross.
Did you say she's got a dog?
A job, not a dog, a job.
A job. I was like, having a dog actually is probably more likely to be autistic. Having a job.
And that makes me really cross because yeah.
Sorry, this lag is it's very difficult, isn't it? I've got another question coming up here from Nuts Sufanat. Sorry, that's not how you pronounce it, I'm sure. Hi, I doubt my diagnosis so much. I study people so much. I try so much that I'm kind of getting good at it, and I fear I will lose diagnosis. Well, as a teenager, my special interest, I guess, was, well, television, but I used TV as a way to study people and to understand social scripts and things like that. And then I went to do psychology at university as a further way to understand people. So I don't think that being good at observing people and having developed that skill, because it is a skill you can develop, I don't think that means that you are not autistic after that point. It just means that you have been working on skill that maybe you weren't good at, but maybe you also were, because observing people isn't in the criteria for diagnostics. What do you think, Ella?
I think if you've been given that diagnosis, then you can kind of, I don't think they can take it away, can they? Can they? That's an upsetting thought. I think, as you've said, I also have been very interested in television and have used characters from television as a kind of way of shaping my math, and currently Grey's Anatomy. So yeah, I think I less successfully maybe than some people, but I think I definitely that. I think the ability to study people and mask is actually quite an autistic thing. It's recognized that a lot of autistic people end up going into acting because they become so good at that. So I feel like studying people and getting good at copying them is definitely not a reason to doubt your diagnosis. But I would say that doubting the diagnosis is a really, really common thing that will get less with time the longer that you've been diagnosed, and the more, I think, the more you hear other people's stories, like watching your videos and meeting other autistic people in my life and kind of having those Me Too moments. So if you're watching this and you're going, oh yeah, me too, then that's kind of enough, really. And also, I don't think there are any like guardians of the diagnosis. I think if you identify as autistic and identifying as autistic is helpful to you, then at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter how proven that is. Does that make sense?
I think it's only if, for example, I think the thing that people always mention is that it's problematic to self-diagnose because you might have something else. And that's the thing. But when you get to certainly for me, for the diagnosis thing, I was screened for bipolar disorder. I was screened for borderline personality disorder and all of these kind of things. So it's like, if that's been ruled out, but then they still are being funny about the autism diagnosis, you know. But I agree with you. I think that studying people in a certain way is an autistic trait. And I know that especially masking autistics, I'm not just going to say it's like women and men, because I think both women and men can do it, but the more the autistics can mask more, are very good at mimicking. I think it's typical that we would also pick up people's accents and mannerisms when we talk to someone. So if I spend a lot of time with one friend, I'll start saying things that they say. And so I just think that whole mimicking thing, studying people is, yeah. But if you doubt your diagnosis for other reasons, that's something else. You know, if you don't think that that's right, then that's something else. But if it's just because you study people and you're getting good at understanding people, like, I would say that I do the same thing.
I completely agree. Dave, can you, sorry, we've got little doorbells for our dog on the back door, and she's just kind of ringing frantically, wondering what that
is. It like on a thing that goes ding ding ding?
Yeah, exactly. A little pause. I have a question for you, Sam, actually. Have you ever picked up an accent? Talking about, you know, hanging out with friends, and then I do the same thing, picking up their mannerisms. In a minute, we're basically going to look like the same person, I suppose. Have you ever picked up an accent? Because I tend to do that, and it can be a bit embarrassing.
Yes. Well, I've always been good at accents linguistically, learning languages. I was always quite good at that. But it was particularly when I spent a lot of time with American friends in my early 20s, especially, I would pick up their accents. And even now, my accent is, it's not as British as it used to be. It's become a kind of European English, which is interesting. What is European English? Not sure. But I don't sound, I definitely, when I was at school, I went to a very posh school, and I think I probably had a very posh accent. And then it kind of morphed to more Americanisms because I watched a lot of American TV as well. And now I don't even know anymore. I don't know. That's the answer. By the way, Stephanie Bethany would like everybody would like me to remind everyone to like the stream while you're here. So thank you for reminding me, because I forgot that. Right, I was going to carry on with some of the comments, but should we talk about the collab that's going up? When is it going up? Next week?
Yeah. So next Friday over on my channel, which is Purple Ella, Purple the colour, Eda my name. Go have a look. It's a marvelous channel. Am I doing PR well? I think
yes.
That was my attempt at PR. Sam and I have recorded a collaboration. We asked your questions about what it is to be an autistic parent, and we are answering these questions in the video, which will be next Friday on my channel. So that's the 8th of May, I think.
Yeah. So I will obviously direct everybody to that video at the appropriate time, but it's going to be, about parenting, being a mother, because we both have, well, you have a lot more experience of motherhood than I do, but I'm catching up a bit. How old are your children?
I have a 13-year-old, an 11-year-old, and my youngest turns 9 next Thursday.
Wow. So yes. Will you have 3 teenagers all in one go? Yeah.
At some point, yeah. Yeah. I think
4 years time.
We had we had a chat ahead of kind of recording for the video, and we had so many on the topic, didn't we, that there might even be kind of future videos on that, in that, I think, for us.
Sorry, I'm now getting completely distracted.
Is it time to go sit on the sofa yet?
It might be getting there. Let me just see if I can get through some of these comments, and then I'll see if I've got any more questions that I haven't. This person says blah blah blah. This person's pregnant, so that will be useful potentially. Yeah, I mean, it could be. It might not. Oh gosh, where is it? This person says, I'm terrified of being a mother because of my autism, ADHD, and OCD. I think we just say, like, there are autistic and ADHD and OCD mothers all the time who do it. And it's hard. I think it's harder if you have these things, but it's not impossible. So don't be scared. I don't know. You're not the pregnant one, are you? I don't know if I'm giving advice to someone else. I don't know.
I think actually the thing that is really important when you think about terror-food is that when you have your children, they're your children, and quite often they're maybe a little bit like you, and so it's quite. I was really terrified of parenting. I think it was the idea of the children, the children that I had met. But when you have your children, they're your children. It's quite a different experience.
Yeah, I mean, other people's children are not my favorite a lot of the time, but I like mine. Is that just me?
I like mine. Exactly. I think that's the point I'm trying to make, really. However clumsily.
Right, we have a question from Gary, who says, I wonder if Sandy and Ella in childhood, did we know what Asperger's was, and was autism in girls seen as rare in the 90s? Well, you go first.
Okay, so I was born in 78, so I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I'm a little bit older than Sam. And when I was young, as I say, mine actually worked in autism. So if there had have been the possibility of a diagnosis for someone like me, I would have received it, because she did take me to see child psychologists and the people around her, because she knew that there was something going on. And I was actually diagnosed with dyspraxia at that time.
Oh.
So there just wasn't Asperger's diagnosis for people like me at that time. It just wasn't a thing. Asperger's only started diagnosed in the early 90s, and then it was only being diagnosed in very stereotypical, often male Aspie kind of boys. So no, there was no possibility that I would have been diagnosed in my childhood at all. And autism was seen as rare. Well, autism was seen as rare in girls as early as 5 years ago. So in the 90s, almost certainly it was seen as rare.
Yeah. And I was born in 85. So yeah, I grew up right in the middle of the 90s. That was my childhood. I don't ever really remember hearing much about it. I think the first time I remember coming across the idea was reading The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, which is written not by an autistic person, about from the perspective of an autistic. Well, I don't think he was ever actually said, but it was assumed that he has Asperger's, I think. But yeah, that was written by a non-autistic person. And I remember reading it and thinking, this doesn't sound like me at all. I didn't relate to it at all, but maybe I should reread it.
No.
Did you read that book?
I enjoyed it as a book. I read it long before I'd ever considered that anyone was autistic, just because it came out and it was popular, and I loved it. I loved it as a book, but I definitely did not think this is me at all in any way.
Yeah.
No, certainly not. In fact, I don't think, even when I kind of realized that I was autistic because of my experiences of going through that process with my child, I hadn't met autistic people that were like me at that point. I still had that stereotypical view, because my eldest child is a mathsy, computer loving, nerdy, autistic person. I still had that stereotype in my head, but I could recognize that my challenges were definitely in line with traits. And it was only when I began meeting other people who presented like me, and as you say, not only women, but men who presented like me, that I kind of found an autism that I could identify with, which actually goes back to that whole believing in my diagnosis. I think meeting people like me really helped me to take that on board as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. After I was diagnosed, I started going, well, I went to a couple of meetups. This feels like so long ago when I was meeting people in real life. And I went to an autistic mums retreat where I didn't know anyone. And I just turned up and it was like, I've just got friends now. You know, like these people are like me. And Alex, and my husband says, you know, like, I know that they're autistic because they're all just like you. So yeah, it's just like every time I meet more autistic people, I'm like, it's becoming way more obvious to me. So yeah. Anyway, I think we answered that question, didn't we? So I'm just going to see there's a couple more questions, and then I think we both probably need to pass out on the sofa. Kind of. It's getting late here. It's 9:15.
Sure.
Right, let me just see. This one's a good one. Do we have any tips on talking to my mama about autism? She has no idea I think I'm autistic and I'm nervous she won't believe me. I would say that, okay, this is no guarantee, but in general, people ask me this a lot and they're very scared of talking to their parents. And it usually never goes as badly as you think. I would say like the majority of the time, if you have a good relationship with your parents, well, goodish, you know, if they're decent, respectable people, I think it's never as bad as it seems. I mean, if I think when I was a teenager, I would have been terrified to tell them, but I still kind of think that they would listen. What do you think, Ella?
I was really terrified of talking to my mom about my autism diagnosis, particularly since it's her area of expertise. I kind of felt like she was gonna dismiss it. That was what I thought would actually happen, was she was supportive and she completely believed. And I think that as time has gone on, in terms of dealing with family members who might not believe me, I've kind of come to the conclusion that we can only control our response to people and stuff that people throw at us. So if we go to our family members and we tell them this personal and you know, kind of vulnerable thing about ourselves, and their response is not believe us or not make us feel heard, then that's not something we can control. We can only control the fact that we shouldn't feel bad or silly or responsible for that reaction. Like you say, I would hope that the majority of loving, supporting parents would make their child feel heard in this situation. And if they don't, then that's a kind of a bigger parental problem. So if you have generally got a good relationship with your mother, I would imagine she'd be really touched and feel honoured that you would choose to share this part of yourself with her. I would hope that would be what would happen. I would also add to that it can be useful to give information alongside that, so videos to watch or pamphlets or books that you recommend, so that you're saying, I'm autistic, maybe you don't know a huge about autism, here's some resources to help you to understand the kind of autism that I feel like I experience.
Yeah, and also I mean, when I told my parents that I think I might be autistic, it was pretty much like that, you know, like I nervously drank a bottle of wine and then cried at them. And you know, I was in my 30s, so oh, I forgot what I was going to say. Oh yeah, I think the thing that took them back was I just kind of exploded my brain into them, but I didn't appreciate that they didn't know what autism was really. Like they had an idea of like maybe this boy over here who acts funny, but they really didn't know what autism was. And so I really think that what you said about giving them information alongside, you know, saying something like, I've been doing research and I've been discovering that there are lots of different types of autistic people, and a lot of them seem very much like me, and a lot of them maybe mask, or if that's something that you do, because I don't think that most people, if you come to them and say you're autistic, they would just be like, oh no, that's rubbish. But I think that they just wouldn't understand, you know, that they wouldn't get what autism was, I think, most people. So even if they want to be helpful, they might somehow invalidate you because they are on, you know, they're running on out of date knowledge. So that's kind of where I would be.
Maybe giving them time to process, expecting the person you're giving that news to need time to process it as well, I guess, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Because obviously the likelihood is, if you are autistic, then both of your parents are also autistic, and then you come into this whole, but that's what we're like kind of situation, which can be very frustrating, because then you have to be like, well, yeah, but not everybody's like this. And then, you know, but my friends are all like this. It's like, yeah, but maybe you have autistic friends. This is just a theoretical conversation, of course. So arming them with information about how autism looks in a certain way that looks like you is probably the best way to go. I've lost the thing to take it off.
Video can be really useful for sharing in those situations.
Yeah, like Ella's videos, my videos. There's one person here who said they used Tony Attwood's video, Could It Be Asperger's? I know that Tony Attwood is kind of like a controversial figure maybe for some. I think they've been discussing it on the chat. I've seen his name pop up a few times, but I've not been able to follow it. Should we try and find one more question before we go? Let me see if actually one of my questions. Right, I've got a good one. What is it? What do you think your life would be like without diagnosis?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
What do you think your life would be like without a diagnosis?
I think that I'll be experiencing significant debilitating mental health symptoms. I think my anxiety would be worse. I think my depression, by this point in my life, I think I would have reached a real low in terms of continuously struggling without having those answers in order to create some strategies and solutions. I would have kind of hit a bit of a wall of can't fix it enough times to have kind of sunk quite low. I think that I would still be having weekly meltdowns like I was before I was diagnosed. So the impacts that might have had on me as a mother and on my relationship with Mr. Purple might have been an issue by now. You know, there's only so long that he could have perhaps handled that kind of dynamic. And I think my self-confidence would not be, my self-confidence is so much higher as a result of diagnosis. And I guess a sense of purpose that I've gotten from what I do now as well as a result of that diagnosis can't be underestimated.
Yeah, I think that, well, for me personally, I've always liked creating things, and I used to have a food blog and stuff like that. But the autism thing was something that, the reason that I like making videos so much is because of the purpose, because I can see that this isn't just about me and being like, well, I want to talk about myself on the internet. Well, I mean, a bit, but it's about seeing that all the comments and in the chat, people saying like, you are just like me. This has helped me so much. It's like, there is a whole, I mean, what do they call it? Like a lost generation of autistic women, but probably also masking autistic men. And, who's going to help these people? How are we going to make a difference to stop people suffering like we did, or maybe we would have, or something, So I kind of feel a responsibility in some ways for that.
Yeah, exactly. Having all those people, I want all those people that watch my videos and watch your videos. I don't care whose videos they're watching. I want them to watch videos and realize that they are not broken, that they are different, not less. I know it's a cliche, but I want them to realize that, and I want them to realize that they are awesome. In the, you know, 80% of the time, I now realize that I am. That sounds awful, but that I am all right. You know, no better or worse than anyone else. And I want other people to feel that way, which is, yeah, what a big part of why I do what I do.
Yeah. Somebody has said, when you finish speaking, give a thumbs up. That will deal with the lag. We'll do that next time. Thank you for that that tip.
No, sorry.
No, it's all right, because I stopped talking and then I wait and I'm like, wait, did she hear me? Is it cut off or is it just a lag? I don't know. But I think that we should both go and have a rest now. Thank you so much for coming on. It's really nice to do a live with someone else, actually, because you don't have to talk 50% of the time. So it's so much easier.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're totally welcome.
Thanks
And
for
I hope that you all go
really
and check out Purple Ella's channel, and we will try not to talk over each other so much. All right, take care, everybody. Thank you all for the super chats. That's really generous of you. That much appreciated. And be sure to go and subscribe to Purple Ella, because her video with me on it, well, both of us answering questions, is going to be next week on her channel. So if you don't want to miss it, please go and subscribe to Purple Ella, because she's pretty awesome, just like me.
Thanks.
All right, guys, take care. And I'll see you, I guess, in a month's time for another live. Bye.